Hi, you're listening to the My Body, My Story podcast.
The clouds were like an alabaster palace, rising to a snowy high.
This is the 45 over 45 chapter where we celebrate rule breakers and role models, the women who inspire us to live life our way and to show their sensuality, beauty, soul, and true essence. Here, we talk about what it's like to be 45 plus, adjusting to the changes that come with time, and we listen to the stories of our participants. If you have an interesting story, we'd love for you to participate. You can email us at info@alexandrawalker.com. That's Alexandra spelt with a K-S. Or visit our website, alexandrawalker.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the My Body, My Story project. And today with us in the studio, Anna. And while she's sitting in the makeup chair and Chitra is creating magic, doing makeup for her, I will interview you and ask a few questions. So let's start, and tell us 10 facts about yourself.
Alexandra, my name is Anna Fraser and I am a professional vocalist, a classical performer, and I specialise in Baroque and Renaissance music as well as very contemporary opera. And I've worked with a number of ensembles in Australia and across the world as well. I have a husband, Daniel, and a son, Horatio, who is 7. And if you would like to know pets, we currently have some leaf insects. And the main leaf insect actually passed away, but she made a whole lot of clones of herself. And so we have now 13 baby clarices.
Oh, wow.
I've never actually had leaf insects before, but they're quite fascinating. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I live in Sydney. I was born in Sydney, and I love living in Sydney, but we also do a lot of travelling as well. We enjoy diving. We've just been to Indonesia, but we enjoy diving all around the world and going to remote places. But my passion is singing and discovering new works as well as performing new works as well. So discovering new works in the sense that we sort of uncover older compositions. And at the beginning of this year, I was invited to return to study at the Conservatorium of Music here in Sydney. And it was quite an unexpected invitation, but this was quite coincidental in a sense. Discovering and sort of researching vocal expressive techniques that were utilised some 250, 300 years ago. So this is from the 1700s through to the 1900s. And the specific research is relevant because we only have a partial snapshot of what those vocal sounds or what those singers were doing at that time through looking at source material, but we don't have recordings. So the project, which is called Rediscovering the Techniques of Bel Canto, is basically going back in time from the earliest recordings of 1850, but listening to these recordings and sort of emulating these recordings, so understanding how these singers use their expressive techniques to make the words sound more like their meaning. But for me, I'm actually doing a doctorate of musical arts, which is a research project looking at the sounds prior to that. So it's I've only just started this research project, and it's a little bit daunting to say the least. I'm doing lots of reading, but I'm trying to find or devise a way of reconstructing this sound world and understanding how these singers from the 1700s would have actually performed, because it was different, for females in particular. Then they didn't have musical positions, they didn't work at court, and they were less represented. So I feel like this is a really great opportunity to sort of delve into, some private environments, if if there is information there to find, to understand what their daily life was like as working musicians, because there were individuals that were actively performing and writing, large-scale works. There's an individual who I would like to focus on. Her name is Mariana Martinez, and she was based in Vienna. And she had all these well-known composers in their youth and also, in their established careers surrounding her, yet no one knew of her. So it's going to be a really interesting process of uncovering some new compositions and representing them, hopefully, in a way that may sort of sound more like what they were doing as expressive vocalists of the time. What else can I say about myself?
I read this. I know it's like a book literature. Maybe it's nothing to do with the real history, but Georges Sand Consuelo, where it's about the opera singer, and I think, I don't remember now, was it in 1800s or 1700s, but it's about that time, about the life of this opera singer. So it's.
Do you remember her name? Or his name?
The author was Georges Sand.
But the opera singer that
the
he was writing about?
book called Consuelo, and the hero of this book, Consuelo, she's the singer.
Consuelo. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'll look at
Yeah,
that.
and I think it's about the Spain or something. And it's been a very long time I read the book, and I actually want to reread it again. But just while I was listening to you, I remember that. I think maybe you should also read it. Maybe you'll get
absolutely.
some ideas.
No, I already have a huge reading list, but I can always add more to it.
So you mentioned that you love, and actually, if someone wants to find you, and where they can find you, Instagram, your website.
Yes, so on my own website, annafraser.net.au, and on Instagram, Fraser Anna in reverse, and also Facebook, Fraser Anna. But also working with different ensembles. If you're interested in, Baroque or contemporary music, then I'm working with Pinchgut Opera, who are based in Sydney. They're a specialised opera company. I've worked with them for almost 20 years and have done a number of productions with them as a soloist as well as a chorus, and they do other festivals as well and touring projects. And then in the contemporary sphere, I work with City Chamber Opera, who we have recently done a very large-scale work, which was a co-promotion or a co-collaboration, co-commission with Sydney Festival, as well as Festival of Holland. So we went to Holland last May and did the world premiere of this particular work called Antarctica, which is by a female composer who's based in Melbourne, Mary Finsterer. It was a really interesting project. It was great to be able to do it a second time. We did it at Carriage Works here in Sydney at the last Sydney Festival. But it was unbelievably challenging in many ways because of the set design and the lighting design, but the concept was really interesting. So it was these three characters that were sort of past ghosts of someone else's psyche. And I played the natural philosopher. And the idea was that, these three individuals, a natural philosopher, a cartographer, and also a theologian, in that sense of the 18th century, heading into the unknown and trying to discover what may be at the end of the earth. So they go to Antarctica. However, there's no ship in this particular production, so it was, in a sense, quite challenging to be a past memory of more contemporary characters, and we were singing in this way that was representative of, say, Renaissance style vocal techniques. And the most challenging part of it was being in this box, which did represent the ship, but it was full of water vapor or haze, because the lighting effect that this wonderful lighting artist, Alex Balazs, had created was altering the LED lights and these panels to appear and disappear. However, we were told that it wasn't going to heat up over the 90 minutes of this particular production in Holland, and we had quite a lot of complications with just sort of set and doing those first performances. But at one point it was 38 degrees inside the box, and we were wearing winter period costumes and sweating buckets. It was just one of those things, and when you have to sing quite an extended sort of solo section for a good 15 minutes, it was like going through unbelievable endurance. But you come out the other side and think, okay, yes, I survived that. What else can I do? So unfortunately, you get these composers that I associate with who are totally wonderful and extremely supportive at the same time. But I was like, don't get any ideas that, this is normal practice, that we sort of put ourselves under these types of conditions and expect to sort of do hurdles and loops and all that sort of stuff. I did a project a couple of weeks ago, which was a solo work with organ, actually, and similarly it was a good 90 minutes of almost continual singing. Again, more endurance, and then the same individual said, oh, I've got some great ideas for a new work. I'm like, don't you dare. But it was a project that I had recorded in Holland as well, almost 8 years ago, and the recording itself was a great experience, but it was the middle of winter, and it was probably between 10 and 12 degrees at night in this particular church that had a very specific organ that was from the 1750s, so it was very close to when this composition was written in sort of 1720 or something like this. But it was quite unusual. It's an Easter setting of the Leçons de Ténèbres, and it's usually performed leading up to Easter on the Wednesday, Thursday and Friday as separate things, but you can't encourage people these days to be available for
3 days.
For 3 days, to experience this type of, sort of musical performance. So I decided to do it back to back, which was, quite challenging.
So for how long you can sing comfortably? Like, I know it's probably depend on the...
Probably this, 90 minutes. Once you get to that point, then you start to think, oh gosh, I haven't been to the bathroom for a while, or I really need a glass of water. I'm one that doesn't tend to drink fluid during my performances. It's one of those things that, it seems to adjust, mucus levels and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of people do, constantly sort of refuel. But then you really need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the logic of it all. But yes, each singer has its own.
We had a lady on the project who was a harpist, and we asked her this question. So I want to repeat this question for you. What was the most weird or interesting place you had to sing in?
This probably production was the strangest in the box.
In the box.
That's probably number one. However, we've done some pretty weird things. In trapezes, upside down. People ask all sorts of strange things of you. I do a lot of experimental music as well. So we did a project earlier this year, which was a recording project for an installation artwork. And even though the sound files that we created weren't particularly unusual, the idea of how it all sort of comes together, and whether we sort of integrate with the sort of integrate live performance with, say, an artwork becomes quite interesting. That you have this sort of sound world, you have this sort of sonic atmosphere that you create in a space. Say if you do something at the MCA or a powerhouse or different facilities where you are responsive to your environment, then sometimes things get pretty weird, because also you have like a reverberant space where you're having to constantly sort of adjust your sound. You hear different things as well. I've sung while diving. Not that that was for anyone's benefit, but my own. So I do a lot of diving, and I had a conversation with a fellow in the most recent trip who teaches free diving, and he was sort of talking about different breathing techniques, and he was asking me about my breathing techniques when it came to singing and whether, you know, my voice was affected while I did diving. And yeah, there are a few different examples of how this sort of integrates with your breath. But you sing to the fish, and they're the only ones that benefit.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, I also noticed that it's quite interesting combination that you're a singer and you like diving, and it's such kind of from going vocal to keeping quiet, and then but it's connected with the breathing technique. So what's your favorite place for diving, you know, in the world?
Well, returning to Indonesia, this was the second time we've gone back to this particular spot in northern Sulawesi, which is Bangka Island and Lembe. We do this muck diving, find all the little critters, and sort of see beautiful reef walls. Really is very spectacular. But what's beautiful about some of these more remote places in Southeast Asia is just that it's quiet, and, you know, we're away from the metropolis. I'm finding the older I get, the more I want to sort of retreat away from kind of, you know, the density. But then my job is performing for audiences, and so you have to find this happy balance between doing something that requires this responsive engagement with an audience. What I love to do is actually make my words sound more like their meaning. That's what our job is, our role is as a singer, is to really communicate those words and the poetry that's been set to music in whatever style of music. But it doesn't work if you don't really connect with your audience, and what's the most rewarding is getting that that sense back that there is that connection with your audience, and that's what we missed most. That's what I missed most when we didn't have the opportunity to perform through COVID. We didn't have audiences, you know, singers had killer chords, all that sort of stuff. But now that we're sort of back into the swing of things, you know, I'm appreciating, because of my age as well, but I'm appreciating every moment that I'm on stage.
You didn't mention your age.
My age, I am 45. I'll be 46 later on this year. In the grand scheme of things, you know, there are many a soprano on my heels to get the next job. What I specialise in is quite unique, and also you only gain that kind of experience through basically just singing lots and lots of different types of repertoire.
Do singers have retirement age, or it's all depends?
I suppose it just depends what happens when the voice decides, you know, it's fatigued. You know, if you protect your voice, don't do such extreme things, I suppose. But those singers that I'm actually listening to in this bel canto project, some of the recordings from, say, like 1905, 1910, then these very famous opera singers, say like Nellie Melba from Australia, but there was another individual who's very famous Italian singer, Adelina Patti, and the recordings that she did, the very first ones, were from, you know, the beginning of the 20th century, and she was in her 60s and still sounding like an absolute angel. So the fact is, you can't tell what's going to happen with your instrument. I think females in general, they're able to maintain a bit more control of their instrument in their older age, but then again, you know, we have to sort of manage the warble. If we're physically out of shape, then, or we're not able to control muscularly what we're doing with the breath, then we start to get, you know, a very wide vibrato, which stylistically, some people think it's appropriate, other people think this is not so great. Also, there's a less distinct pitch. But I think as soon as you sort of take more and more time off, particularly in any profession, that you sort of lose the craft. I'm sure it's the same with sort of makeup as well. If you lose kind of the fine motor skills because you've taken a rest for too long, then it could be more challenging to sort of do that finer detail. Or also eyes deteriorate, that sort of thing.
So what do you do after your voice is not as before and you decide like, okay, it's enough? So what's the next step?
I had this dream during, this idea in lockdown that when I retire, I might pick up the shakuhachi, which is a Japanese bamboo type of flute. It's like a recorder, but it's a very beautiful instrument, quite hooty. I've been quite fascinated for a long time to sort of try this. And I can get myself a teacher. I have a teacher that's available, but it's just time to be able to do this. So maybe eventually I'll take up the shakuhachi and I'll grow dragon fruit. Because the flowers are so magnificent. But, you say these sorts of things and who knows what's going to happen, in the future. Yeah. I didn't know that I would start, doing a research project as well. And I suppose within this opportunity, there are going to be symposiums and forums and things like this talking about my discoveries in different parts of the world as well. So in some ways, I said yes to this project because it's important to me to, I suppose, find a language to talk about these expressive techniques that I use. I haven't actually had to write this down on paper, but I do it through my expressive medium. So it's changing the way that I process the information and analyze my own performance and try to describe this so that, in future generations, they can also be able to understand what we were doing at this time. Like we're trying to understand what happened over 200 years ago. It could be the same in 200 years if we're still here doing the same thing. That's like, oh, that's what they sounded like there. But we have representations of this. But maybe we need to maintain, this florid language, sort of understanding the terminology and that sort of stuff and what that meant to us.
Do you sing in English only, or you sing
Italian and German. I'm actually preparing some Czech and Moravian, some Dvorak Moravian duets with a friend for the Canberra Festival, which is not end of next week, the beginning of the week after.
And when you sing foreign language, do you actually understand, or like?
Oh, I try to. Yeah, we try to. We saw a Czech coach yesterday to sort of work on this. But as a classical singer, you study the big four, and also you want to discover. I suppose the dialects. This is what flavors the music, and the nuts and bolts of singing is the consonants and the vowels, and understanding how your instrument actually produces them is key. But also then it's about really using the breath in an emotional way to connect to those fundamental bits that we use to actually express ourselves, whether it be through spoken word or through song. It's the same thing, so we can kind of analyze it down to what words are made up of.
Does it make a difference, the breathing technique, depending on the language, or not really?
Not really. I suppose some languages have different types of aspirate sounds. I've sung in some African languages, and I find this challenging. There are some sounds in Czech and Moravian that are tricky as well. So it's just sort of practice getting the tongue around it. Yeah. But we do lots of different types of sounds at different speeds, and so it's basically just sort of building up that dexterity of how you can actually create that sound world and match it to the musical setting.
And so how you decided to become a singer? You were from the family of singers, musicians?
No. My grandmother on my father's side was an organist, just an individual that enjoyed playing organ for the local church. My dad does have a very nice voice, very good whistle. I have a good whistle, but don't often use it for anything in particular. My mother did some ballet, but she doesn't sing, but she has been to every performance that I have ever
But
done,
all
I think.
of them from the performance industry, in the performance industry, or just like
No,
their hobby?
Well, no, always sang from a very early age, and I played the violin from age 4 till about 20, and was never going to be a concert violinist, that's for sure. I did play in a lot of ensembles in my teenage years, and really enjoyed that. So I still consider myself an ensemble player, an ensemble singer, and I sang with an a cappella ensemble of 6 singers for 12 years as a full-time job, and loved it. And I still work with different individuals in this way, but it's a very specialised world, the way that we hear the sounds, and singers are emotional, and so it's intense to kind of work on such a concentrated way, but it's extremely rewarding to be able to find these colours and these shapes and express it as as a unit or as an entity. And there is lots of repertoire over hundreds of years that sort of explain the sort of evolution of Western music through these sort of a cappella or sort of vocal expressive devices.
So then when you graduated from the school, you decided I'm going to...
Yes, so I just kept singing through high school, and then I went to the Conservatorium of Music up here on Macquarie Street in Sydney, and then I studied in Boston, actually, at the New England Conservatory for 2 years, and did a graduate program
in the
there.
States.
Yeah, and actually it was the reason why I've also come back to the Conservatorium is that when I was there, I wasn't given a huge number of avenues as performance work opportunities. And in some ways, things have changed a little bit, but Australia's a long way away from Europe. There's only one, at the time there was only one opera company, and there was only kind of one pathway. Either you become an operatic soloist, singing predominantly classical and romantic repertoire, and if you don't get into the chorus or become a soloist, then you probably go to teaching singing. And I was a bit disheartened by this because I didn't really sort of fit into the mould at all. And I still don't really fit into the mould. But when I went to the States, I started to sort of hear and see different types of opportunities. So there was more early music and there was more contemporary music. And this is where I ended up getting lots more work. And when I returned to Australia, then I started to kind of find my way in the picture. And I've done this for the last 20 years. Just kind of, the two extremes. I don't get employed to sing romantic repertoire, particularly on the opera stage, because I just don't have that type of voice. So returning to the study and doing the research is in part wanting to provide sort of insight into what it was like back then, 25 years ago, but also what performance or work opportunities are now available for young singers. And I think there are many more, but how can, I suppose, a vocal technique, a more well-rounded or sort of multifaceted vocal technique be offered within music institutions to support a variety of pathways, a variety of vocal expressive styles, so that you're not just sort of, I suppose, restricted to this is the only way that you can sing, because this is not the only way that we can sing. And also singing should be supporting what the natural instrument is capable of doing. Otherwise people get stressed and instruments suffer, and you're sort of creating a sound world which is not really sort of sustainable for your own instrument. Everybody is different, right? Every instrument is different, every voice is different, and that's what makes us, unique individuals and, a populace that sort of interacts wherever you are on the world. So, yeah, it's...
So what about your family, your husband, your son? Are they also singers, or do they sing?
My husband studied as an actor, but he doesn't really do that anymore. he enjoys his diving, and he does some property management. But yeah,
no singing.
No singing. He does have a very nice voice, nice baritone voice. My son Horatio, who's 7, has an extreme register. He can sing. He's got very good ears to identify, color and texture and all these things. And total extremes. So he's very good at character voices, but he, from the earliest age, and maybe this is the thing because he has always heard me singing, he is not interested at all in me teaching him a song, trying to get him to sing a nursery rhyme. No way. But what my husband has been doing recently is that, we are kids of the 90s. So he's been putting on, some indie tunes and all our favourite rock bands. Actually, took him to the Smashing Pumpkins the other night, which was really great. And he thought it was fantastic because we've been putting it on YouTube on the TV, and he's been doing his own work or doing different activities. And he's been singing along to all these songs, and to actually see them in concert, he was pretty excited. He was fist pumping, and
Do you go to karaoke's?
I have only done karaoke twice. The first time I did it, actually, I won the competition. It was a gong show. And my husband got gonged, but I wanted a small TV. But the second time was in Japan, and that was quite, humorous. So, but yeah, I don't often do karaoke.
Like you don't just trying to find an example. Like if you're a doctor, you don't carry the
stethoscope.
Stethoscope everywhere.
Well, that's the thing. You can't ever be without your own voice. That's why I go under the water, so there's absolute silence.
Exactly.
Or just bubbles, so you can hear.
Excellent. It's very interesting stories. And let's move to the subject of our podcast theme. Is about aging and body image. And my first question in this blog is... what does aging means to you? I know you're just only 45.
Yeah. Well, we're gaining wisdom, but maybe we're also gaining a hell of a lot more. It feels, some days are hard and some days are easier, depending on, how much we indulge in this, that, or the other. But at the moment, I feel it's in part confronting, because we see also parents aging as well, and they have their own conflicts or their own concerns, and it is, I suppose it's necessary sometimes to really acknowledge the mortality as well, but then I think with that acknowledgement, then we strive to make every day count, and do our best in whatever way we can, both physically and mentally. And some things are deteriorating, and we have to sort of go through with that on a day-to-day basis. But I think with the aging, then we become more considered and more emotional as well. I've definitely become more emotional, and I try to use that as a productive tool in my art form. As for the body, well, yes, it will probably cry out at some point and say, let's take a break, and it would be harder and harder. I've seen other singers, return after breaks, that it does take some time for the instrument to respond again. But also it does become fatigued. And also the brain tires, I think. We're constantly processing information, and now with devices and all this sort of stuff, the expectation of what we're able to achieve on a daily basis is significantly more, I think. That we have these meetings that it can be instantaneous, that we don't have to leave our living rooms. But in fact, I don't think this is necessarily so healthy, that we should actually be walking to our meeting and using that as sort of reflective time. So I think it's actually sort of compounding a little bit some of the difficulties of aging and what's happening, because we don't give ourselves that sort of mental space to be able to process it all.
So, but if you could go back to any age,
what
23
age
it would be? And the other question, what advice would you give yourself at this age? 23.
23 would be my figure. That's my lucky number. The early 20s, some of the best times of your life, really. You can get away with a whole lot, and that's probably the advice that, have fun within reason. But, at 23 you think you're invincible. I think that no regrets, but at the same time there's always regrets. we make decisions, but we also have to accept that the decisions are very circumstantial based on how you're feeling, and we can be very impetuous as early 20s. You can be very impetuous as a 45-year-old as well. But yes, it's following through confidently with your choices sometimes, and instincts as well. I feel like I've had good instincts most of the time, but yeah, maybe there was some.
So instincts. It's about instincts. It's about listening to your body.
Yeah.
But if your body could talk, what do you think it would ask you or tell you? Maybe.
Right now.
Right now, yeah.
I can't complain. I've just had a holiday. I'm also getting enough sleep. Maybe not as many wines. But again, find the happy balance between, actually just turning off. This is the difficulty, that we end up working way too long, I think. There was some sort of idea that we were going to do like a 4-day working week, but then the expectation is, we would just work longer on those particular days. At the moment, I feel like I'm working 7 days a week, but I try to really say, okay, well, this is me time and this is work time. Not sure if that's quite successful yet.
Your body would ask you to separate your work from your
and
time
keep walking. I try to do my loop around Centennial Park.
10,000 steps.
It's a good 9Ks or something from my house in Surrey Hills around Centennial Park and back. But it makes my head space better. It makes my heart feel good. The body feels like it's being...
So it's around 7 kilometers.
To do the loop. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think are the main causes of body image issues? I know we discussed it just before we started recording, but the main causes of that issues with our bodies.
Instagram,
social media,
TikTok, social media. I think there's some big concerns about what is visually represented and what we are constantly digesting in this sort of visual world, and the bombardment you can't really control unless you say, I'm out of this, and I think that's probably a healthier perspective. But then I am here with you, and we are going to have a nice time with some photography. So then there's a visual representation. And this is very necessary for my craft as well, and yours. And this is also art. So there's a fine balance between what is kind of art and what we need this imagery for. As for distorting kind of what reality is, this is the concern as well, that things have become quite plastic and trimmed and all that sort of stuff, and this is not something that we can really emulate in any sort of naturalistic way, and it's not representative, I think, of the general populace. There are some individuals out there that probably spend a lot of time on their bodies, and good on them. I wish I had the same amount of time to be able to do that, but constantly adjusting their images in whatever way, in a physical way or in a digital way, doesn't sort of speak to me as something that is sustainable.
It's interesting you mentioned about the representative representation of different, like, let's say, images of body types or whatever. And I'm just thinking that having this project going for 3 years, I noticed that this is like, we have advertising on the Facebook, and everyone can see that, and everyone can decide for themselves if they want to participate or not. And obviously the people register for the project are those who are confident enough to go and show the real self, you know, in front of the camera. And sometimes we have comments like, you don't have the full representation. Actually, we do have all the body types, but what I noticed that this is more about your inner confidence to go out on public, you know, and to show yourself. So I'm thinking that we are in control, you know, because projects like that, everyone is welcomed, but not everyone is brave enough. So we're in control what other people will see. Like my representation is those women who are brave enough to participate in that project.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting.
Well, it applies also, I suppose, within the performance realm.
Exactly.
So to step onto the stage does take courage. As well as that you open yourself up. You know, I have had comments from patrons, because I don't show fear. And there are moments where, okay, the adrenaline gets up and you feel, okay. You have those, maybe if it's a really big project, you have those strange dreams where you've turned up to a venue, you're in the car park, you're naked, and you've forgotten your dress or something like this. They don't happen very often, but it has to be, you know, a pretty crucial thing that sort of thing, you know, the psyche starts to get involved. Yeah. But otherwise, when I step onto stage, I'm exhilarated. You know, this is how I want to present myself. But people don't have the same impression from the outside. So they'll come up and say, oh, that's what you look like, because actually the oral perception, as we said before, that the physical representation of a still image is different from how it's perceived, both as a moving image as well as the sound that accompanies it. So that's why we're so entranced by film, that, you know, we can really set the shot, the mood, the colour, the sound, all these different aspects. And that's why we're sort of caught up in this sort of, you know, this cinematic wave. And it's very evocative. And that's what we do in performance as well, that we want to create these atmospheres. We want to create these moods. And you're doing the same thing, that, you know, we're sort of creating a still representation. And, you know, in recording, this is the same thing. Or say an artist will say, this is my impression on the wall. But this is a very particular moment in time that you might do a number of different sketches and then decide, okay, well, this is the one that really sort of represents. But live performance, you have to say, okay, I'm going to dive in, and then you have to say, well, do I read the review or not? Or does this matter? That's the thing. I think it's the judgment as well, that, you know, if you're happy to put yourself out on, you know, into the media or into the social world, and we have to do this also as promotion, necessary promotion, because this is where everyone is trying to find their information, to see what the next trend is or what's on or whatever it may be. But yeah, it's a fine line. It's a fine line.
So if we're talking about the having negative body image or like negative thoughts about your body, do you think it can affect relationship? Like, I'm talking about all sorts of relationship, your partner, your colleagues. Oh
yes. You know, of expectation. I think it goes both ways, though, that we are all aging together. And I think we see each other, we see ourselves as a younger form, you know, that we remember how that feels. And when we look in the mirror, then we think, oh, it's looking okay. And then sometimes we feel like, no, this is obviously not
Yeah.
going to seduce, your familiar. And so then you try and do something about this. But I think it's very challenging. But I think these types of tools do really help. I've been with my husband now almost 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah, and he's pretty tired of going to my concerts. That's for sure. Because he knows what I'm able to do, but also he hears me practicing and things like
But
this. But he likes seeing a new opera, because it's a fresh palette, that there is that sense of discovery. Say a concert format, there's sort of less of that sort of mystique. And I think this is what sort of invigorates relationships as well, that there's still kind of that sense that, you can be mysterious.
Yeah. Yeah, mystery is always a good.
And maybe, a lovely palette on the face will also add some mystique to the whole thing, or pulling an exotic garment out of the wardrobe,
dressing up,
all this sort of stuff.
So what's your go-to way to deal with negative thoughts about your body if some visits you from time to time?
My way of dealing with
Or
it.
bringing yourself into the shape, like.
Oh yes, I've spoken about the walking and the
diving.
But I think it's a mental thing as
thing,
well. Absolutely, that it's definitely not just you have to feel in shape and stretch and all this sort of stuff. But it's actually just
has it changed
having
with
that.
age?
No, I've been quite good with just mentally processing the sort of negative thoughts and things like that. There's been other things I've had to deal with professionally, which are unrelated to body.
Yeah.
But the aging of the voice, it's a similar thing. Managing those two things, because my instrument's inside my body.
Yeah.
And this is going to also kind of have an effect as the body ages. What's going to happen with the instrument? So it's still a discovery for me, and I think that's the case. Where it's different for possibly you, that
Mine. I'm just
your
thinking of my
instrument.
eyes.
The eyes as well. Well, yes, my eyes are definitely deteriorating. I blame that on devices and age, possibly as well. No, I think you definitely have to be in good mind and good spirit.
Yeah, especially
good body.
Considering psychosomatic basis of most of our diseases, or like a body kind of body gives us signal if something mental happens. So although I believe it's a combination of physiology and psychology, but you mentioned that it's very important part of.
And actually what I'm most concerned about for me is that the outlet that I have, the expressive outlet, the emotional outlet, and the way that sense actually moves through my body, because there are sound waves that we produce and that actually vibrate. And I feel like, I'm relatively youthful, and I feel like that in part the sound waves and the vibrations from my instrument somehow keep me, my thought is maybe it keeps me more supple, or it keeps me youthful. But when I don't have that facility, don't have that emotional connection, the outlet, I could turn into some craggy old thing. Which maybe I'll just embrace that and sort of go and sing in some sort of jazz bar and growl. I don't know. I'm keeping the options open. The shakuhachi. Yeah.
Exactly. So my last question is, do you have any favorite quote or maybe thought or saying about being a woman?
I looked this up because,
I wouldn't ask you to sing. I wouldn't ask you to sing it, though. We had one lady who sang her favorite quote.
Oh, well, there's amazing things. Oh, I could have sung something. If I pull it out, we could pause and I could just find it and sing it to you. But I looked up something. First of all, this whole idea of, where the word Baroque came from. It was derived from the Portuguese Barocco, and it means oddly shaped pearl. So I thought that was quite apt for me. That I'm not perfect. But I was thinking Fellini, you know, the Italian director, must have had something delicious to say about females or women. But what he did actually say was not particularly supportive. But he did say something like, you know, that you exist only in what you do. So I sort of believe that as well. And there is no end, there is no beginning, there is only infinite passion of life. So when we get engaged like this, then I thought of another individual that I have read quite a bit, Anna Nin, and she had some nice quotes. So she says, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage.
Oh.
And also, I am an excitable person who only understands life lyrically, musically, in whom feelings are much stronger as reason. Oh, so, well,
great.
Music is reason to me, and I'm lyrical. And, you know, just another little definition of, you know, what Baroque music is, because I'm kind of in a Baroque week, that, you know, it's all about contrast and movement and exuberant detail, deep colour, grandeur and surprise. So I think I kind of encapsulate all these things. As for how long this will endure for, we'll see, and maybe there'll be more surprises after that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So do you want to find anything to...
Oh, yes. Let me just pull this. Yeah. It's a little jazz number. I don't often do jazz numbers, but I particularly like this one.
Yep.
And we did it in a project in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. And they cut this one because they was too short on time. So I was sad. So now I get to sing this.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You got an opportunity.
So shall I introduce it?
Yep, please.
So this song is by, this arrangement is by Sally Whitwell. It's called Midnight Sun, but it's actually a jazz standard. Mm-hmm. And it's just a cappella today. Maybe it would be accompanied by some lovely jazz chords on the piano. But maybe this is representative of where I am sitting right now, or what's happening in my week. Your lips were like a red and ruby chalice, warmer than a summer night. The clouds were like an alabaster palace, rising to a snowy height. Each star its own aurora borealis. Suddenly you held me tight. I could see the midnight sun. Wasn't quite in tune, however. I could probably sing that better. Sorry, that was a bit out of practice.
Thank you very much. It was such a wonderful interview. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the final accords of that. It sounds really wonderful, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of your day and photo shoot as well. And welcome again to the project.
Thank you for having me.
If you have an interesting story, we'd love for you to participate. You can email us at info@alexandrawalker.com. That's Alexandra spelt with a KS. Or visit our website, alexandrawalker.com.